Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Ann Arbor District Library. My name is Emily, and I'm on the events team here, and thank you for choosing to come inside on this really beautiful evening. I appreciate it. We are so honored to have Congressman Raskin here and Congresswoman Dingell here, and thank you so much to Literati Bookstore for partnering with us on this event and bringing this wonderful event to the library. So I'm going to do oh my goodness, there we go. I'm going to do a very brief introduction of our illustrious speakers, just in case you have not heard of them. All right. Congressman Jamie Raskin has proudly represented Maryland's 8th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives since 2017. Prior to his time in Congress, Raskin was a 3-term state senator in Maryland and the Senate Majority Whip. He was also a professor of constitutional law at American University's Washington College of Law for more than 25 years. He has authored several books, including the Washington Post bestseller, Overruling Democracy, the Supreme Court versus the American People, and the highly acclaimed We the Students, Supreme Court Cases for and about America's Students. Congressman Raskin is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School and a former editor of the Harvard Law Review. He and his wife, Sarah, live in Tacoma Park. And now for Congresswoman Dingell, who's going to be in conversation, blah, 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 blah. Okay, you know her, she's great, she's awesome. Welcome back to the library.
Hey, that was great.
One more thing, just for a little run of show here. So after they have their conversation, we're going to open it up for questions. There's going to be a microphone on the central aisle so you can come up and get in line to ask your question when the question period has ended. Jamie Raskin will be signing books over here at this table, and you can buy books from Literati if you have not purchased one already. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you to the Ann Arbor District Library for hosting us tonight, and to Literatis for doing this. So I'm really excited to welcome my friend Jamie Raskin to Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County, and Michigan. And he's been talking about coming for a while, and I thought it was really, he may be doing some other things, but we won't talk about those tonight. But I wanted him to really come. His book is fabulous, and I like people to read his book because you learn about a real person. You realize that people, elected officials, are real people. But he also talks about the most recent book talks about a very important time in our history. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. I hope you read the book. I hope you learned some things tonight. And Jamie, I thank you for coming. And these are the wonderful people of Ann Arbor. But I'm going to start I'm now an Ann Arbor resident. I think everybody, I've moved. I'm here in August. I'm here officially, but I've been representing them since I've been in office. But I want to ask you a question. We're going to get right into it so we can get to your questions. But what did you learn writing this book?
Well, first, can I thank you for showing me around Debbie Dingell. You guys have an unbelievably amazing Congresswoman here in Debbie Dingell, who I see working her heart out every day for the people of the district. And she's always asking how this bill or that bill is going to affect her constituents. So you couldn't find a better representative than you found in Debbie. And she showed me around. We got to go to Zingerman's for lunch, and we're going to go to Zingerman's for dinner.
The Roadhouse.
I want to go back.
The Roadhouse. He did deli for lunch, Roadhouse for dinner.
And we went down to Flint. I got to meet the governor of your great state, Governor Whitmer, and I met the lieutenant governor. And I met Attorney General Dana Nessel, and the Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist. Tall. Yes. He's almost as tall as I am. It's amazing. And who else did I don't know. Well, Dan Kildee was there. You guys send some very, very fine people to Washington to represent you. And thank you, Michigan, for always hanging tough for America and showing America what solidarity really means, because it was born right here in Michigan. So what did I learn writing my book? You know, I started writing my book, Debbie, as you know, because you remember those dark days. I started writing it as a love letter to our lost son, Tommy, and And then it became kind of a love letter to America at the end. And I suppose nobody's asked me that before, but I suppose I learned most about how personal democracy is to everybody, and how much we depend on democracy in ways we don't even think about on a daily basis, but also how each of our lives is so intertwined with our political conditions. Tommy was struggling with depression, and he was such a brilliant, creative young man. He was a poet, he was a playwright, he was a comedian. He was just an absolute riot in the pre-January 6th sense of the word. He was a normal tourist visit. He was Tommy, but he was fighting depression, and during COVID-19, everything got very dark. I mean, he was sent home from school. He was a second-year student in Harvard Law School, and all the students went home, and you guys will recall it was a profoundly isolating, demoralizing time for everybody, but especially young people, and especially young people who have depression or anxiety or some other, condition. And today, a majority of young people report anxiety or depression. It's hard to stigmatize something that affects most of the people. I guess that's the good news. We can talk about it and people don't feel ashamed, but the bad news is that it's just an epidemic. The Surgeon General has declared it a nationwide emergency, the mental and health crisis among young people, and not just Tommy's age in their 20s, but kids in their teens and even middle school and elementary school facing really severe problems. So, I write about how dangerously reckless and irresponsible Trump's policies were with respect to COVID-19, the denial, the deflection, the refusal to come up with a nationwide plan, the refusal to deal with it, and it shut everything down, which of course they turned around and blamed Democrats for. But everything's connected. Everything is connected. I suppose I learned that in a really profound way. And so many families have been touched by COVID-19. We've lost more than 1 million of our people. So many have been touched by the opioid epidemic, by fentanyl, by the mental and emotional health crisis in the country. These things are not misfortunes that families should suffer on their own. We have to support people. We need to develop community policies and public policies that express our solidarity and our care for people. And we've got to turn it around because our people have been suffering hard during this time. And, I have felt like Joe Biden, who's been really good to our family, and I talk in the book about calls that he made to us at different pivotal times. He's been a very good president for us because he relates so much to people who have suffered, these kinds of catastrophes in their family, and that's what it is. But, my dad always used to say to us when we were growing up, when everything looks hopeless, you're the hope. And so all of us have to take up our portion of the hope and spread it out, and especially extend that blanket of hope to the young people in our lives, because it's been real hard for them with COVID-19 and with climate change, which weighs so heavily on them, in a way that, maybe it doesn't for those of us who are in middle age and beyond. But if you're 20 years old and you're looking at the hurricanes and the drought and the flooding and the ocean levels rising, a lot of young people talk about whether or not they should have kids, given what's going on. So, we need some aggressive political action to make progress on the problems of our days. to let young people know we're with them and we're going to get through this. Democracy has faced crises before. We're going to defend ourselves against the autocrats and the theocrats and the kleptocrats, and those people are not going to save us from climate change or anything else. We're going to have to do it.
Thank you. I know I cut right to the chase, but you guys hear from me too much, and I want you to get to know my friend Jamie, who really is a friend. And I don't want to dwell on mental health issues tonight, but as you all know, I'm pretty public and open about my own family, because I do think we need to take the stigma off and be there to support each other. And I think the most important message of tonight is for us to be the hope for someone else. A little act of kindness can make all the difference. But Jamie, let's, maybe today was, your committee made a little news. But let's, you and I were together on January 6th. We remember what that day was like. What are the lessons do you want American people to take away from January 6th? And, maybe if you wanted to, you could talk about the committee too.
Well, I remember when 9/11 happened, how it was this staggering, shocking event to people right immediately around New York, around D.C., around in Pennsylvania, where the plane went down. But then as you move further out in the country, people didn't understand it in the same visceral, emotional way. So, Debbie, you and I were right there on the floor of the House when the attack happened. And so I know that you feel the same obligation that I feel to talk to our fellow beloved Americans about what happened, because we almost lost everything on that day. We really did. And the way I conceive of it, if this helps you in any way, is that there were kind of three rings of sedition taking place. And the outer ring consisted of tens of thousands of people who had been drawn to Washington by Donald Trump's tweet promising a wild protest against the peaceful transfer of power, something that never happened before. I mean, that in itself is a pretty shocking thing, that a president would call for a protest against the peaceful transfer of power to stop the steal. But within that crowd, there was a mixture. There were some people who came just because the president was telling them they were about to lose their government. I mean, he didn't mention that he'd lost the election by 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, the exact same margin he had defeated Hillary by in 2016, a margin he described as an absolute landslide. He didn't mention that 62 courts, federal and state courts, including 8 where he had nominated the judges themselves to the bench, had rejected every claim of electoral fraud and corruption in the country. He didn't mention any of that. He just said they're about to steal the election. Come. So some came rather innocently, not really knowing what to expect. Others came ready for violence, and we know that from the websites and the email traffic and the Twitter and so on. And that crowd was rapidly turned into a mob. That mob followed the middle ring of sedition that day, which was the ring of the insurrectionists. And this was the organized domestic violent extremist groups, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, the QAnon networks, the militia groups, the Aryan Nations, the First Amendment Praetorian, the Rod of Iron, which is a religious cult in the direct lineage of Sun Myung Moon. It's one of his sons who created his own religious cult, but it just became a gun cult. They were there. There were thousands of arms either in Washington or left in arsenals in Virginia because of the District of Columbia's strict gun laws that don't permit open carry. And these people were training for and ready for violence. Many of them have already pled guilty to seditious conspiracy, which means conspiracy to overthrow the US government or put down the government or thwart the laws of the United States. They were the first ones to attack our officers, more than 150 of whom were wounded and injured and hospitalized. They ended up with broken jaws, broken necks, broken arms, legs, fingers, ribs, traumatic brain injuries, heart attacks, strokes, post-traumatic stress syndrome. I still have constituents who are Capitol officers who haven't gone back to work and spend 2 or 3 days a week in physical therapy and mental therapy, okay? And they smashed our windows, they broke down our doors. You've seen the pictures of them invading. They drove the House and the Senate out of our chambers for the first time in American history. They interrupted the peaceful transfer of power. They chased the Vice President of the United States, chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," out of the building. And some of them, or some allied groups, also planted IEDs at the DNC and the RNC, actual explosive devices that were picked up in the morning by the bomb squads. Okay, this was not the scariest ring, okay, of sedition. The scariest ring was the very innermost ring of the coup. And coup is an odd word to use in the American political parlance because we don't have a lot of experience with coups in our own country. And we think of a coup as something that takes place by the military against the president. But the political scientists also describe another kind of coup called a self-coup. And this is when a president, fearing electoral defeat, decides to attack the constitutional order itself in order to upset regular governmental process and seize the presidency, which is a perfect description of exactly what Donald Trump was doing. He had simply refused to take no for an answer. And it started by going to the state legislatures to try to get the GOP-controlled legislatures to nullify the popular vote and pass statutes just awarding the electors to Trump. And when they, to their credit, refused to do that, then it shifted over to the state election officials, people like Brad Raffensperger. And there the idea was, well, just go out and, find me 11,780 votes, he said, one more than I need to win. Which, if you think about it, is kind of funny, because I imagine them, carting in 25 boxes of ballots, and then the election officials saying, "What's that?" And they say, "Well, this is 11,780 votes, one more than Donald Trump needs to win." And they say, "Well, where did they come from?" And they say, "Oh, well, we just found them." Okay, how many Biden ballots are in there? None. Donald Trump got 100% of the votes. So, it wasn't Trump trying to block election fraud. That was Donald Trump trying to commit election fraud in Georgia. But they made more than a dozen calls like that all over the country. We know about Brad Raffensperger, a lifelong Republican who'd actually given significant sums of money to Donald Trump in the last 2 elections. We know about it because he was so shocked and scandalized about what Trump was proposing to do that he decided to tape the call. That's the only reason we're able to report that one. Of course, he denies all of the other contacts. But anyway, that didn't work out, again, to Raffensperger's great credit, but also to his great detriment, as he and his wife and his family were subjected to ruthless, merciless ridicule, taunting, and threats online at their house. His wife got a message saying, "Your whole family should be lined up and shot." And this, went on and on. We got into some of that in the hearing. Okay, from there was a little bit of a detour because his disgraced former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, who'd been forced to resign his office after 17 days for lying about his contacts with various Russian officials, including the ambassador from Russia, had a plan to send the military to seize election machinery in a number of states, including Michigan, and then have the military rerun the election. because all of you know about that provision in the Constitution, which allows the military just to steal the election machinery and rerun the election. And when that didn't work, then finally it all came down to January 6th. What are we going to do? We're going to get Vice President Mike Pence, who presides in a ministerial way over the joint session of Congress under the 12th Amendment and the Electoral Count Act, to unilaterally, lawlessly nullify electoral college votes from Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and by doing that, we'll lower Joe Biden's total below 270. At that point, either we will declare Donald Trump the victor, or, as John Eastman said, more likely we'll kick it over into the House of Representatives for a so-called contingent election under the 12th Amendment. And why would they want Speaker Pelosi and a lot of true blue Democrats like Debbie Dingell deciding who the next president would be? Well, they knew under the 12th Amendment that we don't vote on the basis of one member, one vote. We vote on the basis of one state, one vote. And after the 2020 elections, they have 27 state delegations. We have 22 delegations. Pennsylvania is split down the middle, 9-9, so they'd be off to the side. So even had they suffered the defection of my new best friend in the House after Debbie Dingell, Liz Cheney, the at-large representative from Wyoming, who would cast the sole vote for that state, still they would have had 26 votes. At that point, they were prepared to send Donald Trump in. This is why he wanted to ride the beast from the White House to the Capitol, join the mob, and then enter on the shoulders of the mob like Mussolini and be declared president. And at that point, I believe, but we won't know until he decides to reply to our subpoena and come in and testify, but I believe at that point he was prepared to follow Flynn's advice, invoke the Insurrection Act, declare martial law, and call in the National Guard, which had been withheld all day, in order to put down the insurrectionary chaos they'd unleashed against us, and then they were prepared to blame the whole thing on Antifa. So that was pretty much where they planned to go. And so what I want people to remember is, had it not been for Mike Flynn, who to my mind had demonstrated nothing other than invertebrate sycophancy and obsequiousness for 4 years, okay? Had he not done his job on that day, which he did, he kept his constitutional faith, had our officers not fought like gladiators for 4.5 hours in that medieval-style violence unleashed on them with steel pipes and Confederate battle flags and Trump flags and American flags turned into spears, had they not hung tough, Officer Dunn and Officer Fanone and Officer Hodges, if they had not done what they did, everything could have been different. We could have had martial law. We could have had him. I mean, Donald Trump went to sleep thinking on January 5th he was going to be president for another 4 years. As Steve Bannon said on his show, it's not going to happen the way you think it's going to happen. And all of them thought that they had a plan to take our democracy. So I just don't want anybody to be casual about your right to vote, about the problems that face us, and the fact that that guy and his movement are still at large in America today.
Yeah, he tells the truth. I want to make sure we're answering people's questions, so I could ask questions forever, but I think we should open it up to people who came tonight. I want people to really know and listen to the wisdom of Jamie Raskin.
Thank you, Ann Arbor District Library, for having me.
Here comes the first question.
May I ask, Representative, you're still teaching law students?
No. Well, I was at the University of Michigan Law School today, but it's pretty episodic. So yeah, somebody said to me today, "Are you still teaching constitutional law?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm trying, but they're not listening." You know?
So let me go for a different question. Are you and Mrs. Dingell prepared to try to do something about the annual debt ceiling charade that we go through in Washington?
But I certainly am. I'm no expert on it, but my basic feeling is the government of the United States has got to meet our financial obligations, and it's ridiculous to use the debt ceiling as a point of leverage or a moment of blackmail, political blackmail in Washington, which has been happening repeatedly. So I would like to do something about that. And Debbie might have some further thoughts.
No, I agree with you 100%. And what I'm scared to death is people need to know their vote matters. Don't believe any poll you see except for the poll that happens election day. I mean, the financial markets are already worried about what will happen if Kevin McCarthy is Speaker, and the drama that will play out that will hurt the economy. So we need to do something. We're trying to do something. You remember that the United States Senate is the place where bills go to die, and you need 10 Republican votes to get anything done this day and age. We're not here to, we can do this another night. I'm an institutionalist and was not sure you should take the filibuster on, but if we don't, we're not going to get, too many things aren't getting handled in this country that need to get done. So thank you for that question.
Hello. Thank you both, Representative Dingell and Representative Raskin, for being here. I'm a law student at Michigan, so I was also at your talk today. But I wanted to ask, since you brought it up this evening, the discussion of mental health and your son's death by suicide, I did want to ask you, because I recall really my first interaction with you, Representative Raskin, was a really compelling profile that the New York Times did on you on January 6th, 2022, a year after the insurrection. And that article laid out the timeline from your son's death and then the insurrection and then your role as an impeachment manager. And I'm curious, given your long tenure as a law professor, if that has changed some of your thoughts on mental health, especially in the legal profession. That is one thing that, so I'm a third-year law student, that's one thing that we've been kind of ramped up for and reminded of, that lawyers suffer pretty high rates of mental health and things like that. And so I know your son was also a law student, so I hope the question's not too personal, but I'm curious if kind of that timeline of events changed any of your perspectives.
Well, there's a lot of stuff about that in my book. It is pretty wrenching to get into it, but I guess I'll just say, it is a problem endemic in the legal profession. I mean, it's tough work, it's hard work, it can be lonely, it can be draining for people. And lots of times, I'll talk to law students. Like today, I talked to some law students, and they want to be part of the solution, and they ask what they should do. And I say, well, the first thing is you've got to secure your own happiness and your own health. And for those people who want to go to Wall Street and be corporate lawyers, more power to them. But people have got to get over this idea that there's one pathway for lawyers. There are people all over the country who need the help of lawyers and need you to have real skills and real intervention. So I'm encouraging law students to get together and go find beautiful, great communities like Ann Arbor or Lansing or Flint, places, especially, states with large electoral colleges that are swing states, Go to those, go to those states and bring your best friends and plant some roots and build a happy life and fight for the future. I mean, that's where we really need you, much more so, I think, than just the big corporate law firms or what a lot of the law schools are teaching or, leading people to.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hi. I just first wanted to say that I'm really thankful that you wrote this book. Sorry, I might get a little. I lost my friend 4 years ago to suicide and higher
very
education.
sorry. Yeah.
And I was also half a mile away from the Capitol on January 6th. I was in DC that day, and I can't even imagine experiencing that big of a loss, and then being in the middle of that, because even being half a mile away and experiencing those in like 2 separate times of my life was a lot.
Yeah.
So I wanted to thank you for writing this book.
Well, it was a very emotional thing for Debbie and me and everybody who was there. But, for me, and I record this in the book, having just lost Tommy, I experienced no fear at all on that day. I felt Tommy was with me and he was in my chest, but I was very, very angry. And I don't want to lose touch with the anger I had about what they were willing to do to our democracy.
For sure. Yeah, and so I guess my question is a little bit related, but I think that a lot of people who are doing mental health advocacy on the grounds, you talked about the U.S. Surgeon General's report, and I think we all know that, again, that COVID-19 was really difficult for a lot of mental health issues in this country. But I think a lot of mental health advocates, myself included, who have been doing work in higher education, even in middle school, high school, undergrad, and now even in medical school, a lot of us feel like we're fighting against all of these systemic barriers. And no matter how much we can do personally to try and make sure that we are supporting ourselves and that all of us around us, we're trying to support other people around us as well. I think a lot of people are feeling very tired that it is up to us and our individual accountability to support us against these systemic issues.
Yes.
And that even now we're fighting for our own mental health. So I wanted to
Are you in
ask-
med school?
I am in med school.
Yeah. Well, and that's another place where mental and emotional health is so often neglected, and especially when you're asked to help other people, but you experience a lot of stress yourself.
For sure.
Right.
And I guess I just wanted to ask, I know in your book you talk a lot about engaging young people, the Democracy Summers thing that all of these things. And so I guess my question is, what do you think it looks like on a state or a national level to start to support young people while they're fighting this good fight? Because right now it kind of seems like we're standing here and we're waiting, and we have this report that says we need help. And we just passed a national law to make a national suicide hotline number that's
Yes,
a lot
988.
easier.
988, yeah.
But I think a lot of us are still feeling like we are fighting the fight ourselves.
Yes.
And so I wanted to ask what that looks like on
All
the
right,
state
well,
and national
first of
level.
all, can we thank this beautiful young woman for everything she's doing? And, I don't want you to feel alone, and I don't want you to feel isolated. And obviously, you need to connect with other med students, but there are a lot of people who are supporting you, and we're grateful for what you're doing. I mean, we need an infusion of new people in the field of emotional and mental health and for the schools in the country. So we do have to pay attention to what you guys are going through. And remember that in life, as in politics, no good act is wasted. It's really not. And you can change one person's life, like Debbie was saying. You can be the hope for another person, another student, and patient, or what have you. And the democracy, I've turned my campaign into Democracy Summer. Debbie knows all about what I've been working on, and she's helped me, and I think we have 75 or 80 members across the country. But basically, I just said, I come from a pretty blue district, and so I'm not going to waste, my generous campaign donors' money on TV and radio and direct mail and all that stuff. And so we've turned my campaign into a school, basically, for young people about the history of social and political change in the country and the role that young people have played in every movement we've ever had, from the labor movement to the civil rights movement to the women's movement, and the role that they can play today in terms of registering people to vote, knocking on doors, digital organizing, and all that kind of stuff. And so I think we've got to get away from the idea that, the physical and mental and emotional health and the educational progress of young people is something that's delegated to schools or it's delegated to doctors. The whole society's got to take responsibility for it. And that means that the political parties, the community groups, we've got to be reaching out to the generation that is going to be taking stuff over soon. So I thank you for remembering that. And, Tommy had a favorite quote from Wittgenstein. Tommy really loved philosophy a lot, and I talk about this in the book. But, Wittgenstein said that the test of truth in an empirical statement is whether it corresponds to reality. The test of truth of an analytical statement is whether it corresponds to the laws of logic. But the test of the truth of an ethical or moral statement is the courage with which you act to make it real in the world. So thank you for making real your moral commitments by what you're doing in school and how you're going to spend your career.
Thank you.
Thank you. So,
Good evening. First of all, thank you so much for all you do, both of you, every day working so hard for us. And I really always admire your articulate way that you can stand and present information just fluidly.
oh, thank you. You're sweet to say. Well, I was a law professor for 25 years, and I really wanted to be a stand-up comedian, so I focused on that. So,
Right. Well,
most law professors are frustrated stand-up comedians, I think so.
my question is regarding the blatant statements that were made well before January 6th about the plan, that,
Yes.
that violence would happen. I go back even to the debate in 2016 when Trump said, Russia, if you're listening. I mean, how much more blatant
Yes.
Could he be
Yes.
about what was going on?
Well, thank you so much for pointing that out. I mean, there's a couple important points there. One is there was nothing remotely spontaneous about this. This was not like, an old-fashioned rally that got a little bit out of hand. This was an organized, premeditated hit on the U.S. government. And it also went way back, as you're suggesting, to 2016. Roger Stone had an entity that he had set up in 2016. You know what it was called? Stop the Steal.
Oh, my.
2016. So it was all ready to go in 2020. I mean, they were amazed when Trump won in the Electoral College in 2016. They'd been predicting the reverse, that he would win the popular vote and lose the Electoral College, but he lost the popular vote and won in the Electoral College. But they were prepared to do that Stop the Steal thing back then. And of course, Trump on January 6th on the Ellipse was saying, and all of you really came up with this slogan, Stop the Steal, which actually they had, incorporated back in 2016. And they'd really gotten it from some foreign autocrats because, all of them are in league together. Putin and Orban and Marcos and Erdogan and El-Sisi and Xi, all the autocrats from Moscow to the kleptocrats in Mar-a-Lago to the theocrats in Saudi Arabia, they've all found each other and they're rooting for and organizing for the destruction of democracy in this century. So it's not to put too much pressure on you, but we can't fool around with this. And we've got to show some democratic resolve and some vigor in fighting what's taking place because, Bannon has a plan for international alt-right action to destroy the democracies and to build what Orban calls illiberal democracy. There's democracy only for mass action against minorities and immigrants, but nothing about freedom and nothing about real elections. And we can see from Putin what they want to do. I mean, shut down the political opposition, shut down the newspapers, throw everybody in jail, draft everybody, and then wage bloody imperialist invasions against anybody who dares to have a democracy. So, we should continue to express our solidarity and our strong support for the people of Ukraine and the people of Iran also in their struggles.
So my question is, knowing that they were, because they were so blatant, what could have been put in place? I wondered, why was there no preparation for that? And,
Well, to the
what
extent
do we do going forward?
Yeah, to the extent that we learned, or to the extent that the Secret Service and the Capitol Police learned of various plots being discussed online, that's something we're going to deal with in the final report of the January 6th committee. Missed cues and missed clues and things that might have been done. And, the ultimate charge for our committee is to issue legislative recommendations on how to prepare for and prevent coups, insurrections, political violence, and electoral sabotage moving forward in the future. So you'll be reading a lot about that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm too tall for this.
Hi. I introduced myself earlier, but I'm a student at the University of Michigan, and I was just curious. Well, first, thank you both for being here, and I know Debbie's all around Ann Arbor all the time, so thank you for all that you do for Ann Arbor and for University of Michigan, too. I'm curious if you have any advice for young people who want to go into public service, and specifically, like, for people who are coming from historically underrepresented groups. I have both like a chronic illness and a disability, and so I've spent a summer in DC, and I've seen how hard it is to break through into that those fields and to really engage on a professional level when you come from a group that's being directly targeted by so many people, such as the insurrectionists we've been talking about.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for your commitment to public service and political action and doing what you're doing at the university. I think you're doing everything right. I mean, the main thing is to be involved and get to know people, and Debbie Dingell's the best, so definitely get to know her, and I'll give you my card, and you'll have friends in low places in Washington. But Debbie knows everybody, and in fact, any of you guys, if you give me your email, I'll put you on my list, and you'll never be lonely again. I guarantee you. So yeah, stay in touch with us, and just keep working, and you'll find the right place to go.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Hello, Jamie. It's great having you in Ann Arbor and seeing your work with the committee. We really see you as a heroic person in your involvement with that committee and everything you've done. Really appreciate it. This discussion of January 6th shows the fragility of our democracy, but another thing that's also shows our democracy to be sort of fragile is the way dark money and the super PACs are now able to put hundreds of millions of dollars into individual races, so that our democracy is now down to just a few races to decide what's going to happen with two parties. I mean, is there any way that we can look ahead to a vision where this dark money, this huge amount of money, PAC money that's put into the races, just to funnel all the money into a few races that are the critical ones? I mean, that is a very undemocratic method of electing our officials to begin with. Is there a vision of that where we might not have that someday?
Well, thank you first for your kind remarks. Secondly, I think, Julie, you're telling me we should probably cut it off after the people in line, just because we wanted to sign books, right? Did people have books that they? We'll take the questions that are in line now, and then I'll be able to sign books for people who've got books before we got to go to our next thing.
Julie hates it when Jamie and I are together, because we'd be here forever and talking to you forever, and you all don't want to. The library closes at 8 o'clock. So
no, great question. I mean, the way that I see it is.
Okay, I'm going to be the disciplinarian. We're going to take all the questions, and you're going to answer them all.
Yeah, and I'll go as quickly as I can.
See, Julie, don't yell at me. I tried.
I mean, I believe the vast majority of American people reject insurrectionism and racism and fascism and are, on our side. However, we've got all these anti-democratic mechanisms that are working to thwart the majority will. The voter suppression statutes, the gerrymandering of federal and state legislative districts, the use of Citizens United and corporate dark money to drown out speech and try to, force elections in a particular direction, the manipulation of the filibuster to prevent all of the legislation that would solve these things. And the filibuster, mind you, is not in the Constitution. It's not in federal law. It's a rule of the Senate, already riddled with more than 100 exceptions, including the Trade Adjustment Act, the Budget Reconciliation Act, judicial nominations. So how about if we could elect 2 more real Democratic senators who act like real Democratic senators, and we could carve out some exceptions to the filibuster for voting rights and for a universal background check on gun purchases and reproductive choice and trying to undo the wreckage of Citizens United. So those are all things that we need to get done. Now, we're also up against, just taking full stock of our situation, right-wing judicial activism in a completely gerrymandered Supreme Court. My constituent, Merrick Garland, who was then the chief judge of the United States Circuit Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, was nominated 11 months before the end of Barack Obama's term, and was not given even a hearing by Mitch McConnell and the Judiciary Committee. Not even a hearing. And then 4 years later, when we lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg, 2 months before the election, they said 11 months was too close to the election. Let the people decide. Of course, the people decided by electing Barack Obama for a full 4-year term. But then 4 years later, when it happened, they nominate and ram through the nomination of Mrs. Waterford or whatever her name is, and voting had already started in more than 20 states around the country, and it wasn't too close to the election at that point. The illegitimacy of the Supreme Court is unbelievable in terms of how it's composed and the damage that they're visiting upon the constitutional rights and freedoms of the people. So we're going to have to deal with that problem too. And we're sort of in a closed matrix of GOP democracy suppression tactics, including the one that you cited, and somehow we've got to break into that circle, and I'm hoping that it will be in this election in 2022. But we are up against this avalanche of big, dark money at the end of the election, which is meant to drown out speech and also demoralize everybody. Don't get demoralized. Don't get disenchanted. Tell everybody now is the moment to show your toughness, like the people of Ukraine rejecting Donald Trump's best buddy, Vladimir Putin, and kicking his imperialist army out of their country. Act like the women of Iran who are overthrowing their morality police and their theocratic censors. That's what we need in America. We need a feminist revolution here. Oh, yeah, we're going to do all the questions at once. We'll keep mental note, and then...
At dinner, I was talking to my partner with a sense of urgency that the polls are now saying that the tide is shifting more to the Republicans. And so it made me think, well, what would happen if those like Kerry Lake and others of her ilk who have expressed the idea that the election will be okay if I win. If it's not, then I don't win.
There you go.
And now, so I was just, my question is, if it is transparent to an objective observer that the election is being stolen from the Democrats, has the members of Congress and the Senate game planned that, as something that could be done to rectify the situation?
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't want to get into the situation, so we got to beat them in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But I mean, we've got to, fight for the best and be prepared for the worst. But I mean, you put your finger on it. I mean, we cannot put election deniers in charge of elections in the United States of America. We can't do that. I mean, that's a defeat of everything that generations of Democratic patriots have built in the country. The political scientists tell us that the hallmarks of a fascist political party, an authoritarian political party, are one, a cult of authoritarian personality led by a charismatic or allegedly charismatic figure who dictates to everybody what to do. Second, a refusal to accept the results of democratic elections if they don't go their way. And three, an embrace of political violence or a refusal to disavow it. And they all got mad at Joe Biden for going to Philadelphia to Constitution Hall and saying that he saw semi-fascist dynamics among the MAGA Republicans. But if the shoe semi-fits, you semi-wear it, okay? That's the way I feel. So
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So,
Whatever. First, I want to thank you. I was part of the Democracy Summer program over the summer
Excellent.
here. So I was with Congressman Levin's campaign. So I wanted to thank you
Good for
so
you.
much for putting all that on. It was just extremely grateful.
That's awesome. Well, we had more than 1,000 Democracy Summer Fellows across the country. The DCCC endorsed it. So congratulations. And where are you in school at Michigan? Or?
Yep. Yeah.
That's
I'm a
awesome.
sophomore here.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to ask you, it's been almost 2 years now since January 6th and the impeachment process that followed it. You were impeachment manager, and obviously it passed the House and then went into the Senate after Trump had already left office. And even though it wasn't successful, it was still the most bipartisan impeachment ever. So like looking back as an impeachment manager, what do you think could have gone differently, or what do you hope could have developed?
Well, I'm not going to give you an exhaustive answer to your question because my book really does go into great detail on it. But I tell you two things that I kind of fault myself for not pressing harder, because when we first got over to the Senate, I said, like, how can we win this if all the Democrats are seated over here and all the Republicans are seated there? Whoever heard of a jury that was seated according to political party registration, you know? And if this is going to be a real jury, we should do it alphabetically or we should do it randomly. But the senators were all already shaken because, you know, the QAnon shaman and the Proud Boys had taken over their desks and rifled their papers, and the leadership of the Senate on both sides basically felt you can't displace them from their desks. You know, they would not be able to take that. And so I let it go, and I really regret that because, you know, they swore an oath first to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and then they swore another oath to render impartial justice. And impartial is almost another word for nonpartisan, right? Objective justice. But we had senators who, before we put on any evidence, were out there saying, and we're going to acquit Donald Trump, and, you know, already prejudging it. And then even at the end, Mitch McConnell gets up and, you know, basically says, well, the impeachment managers made their case. Donald Trump is ethically, morally, factually responsible, but we didn't have jurisdiction to hear the case, which was a legal question we had resolved the other way on the first day of the trial in a 56-44 vote, rejecting Trump's claim that somehow the Senate didn't have jurisdiction because he was already out of office, a claim that had been made for more than 2 centuries in impeachment trials that had always been rejected by the Senate. And so to my mind, you know, the 7 Republicans who voted with us and gave us a 57-43 margin, they did their duty, and the other 43 violated their oath, and it was really the greatest act of jury nullification in American history, is the way I see it. But thank you for your work.
Thank you.
So,
Hi. So I was wondering, towards the beginning, you mentioned wanting to not lose sight of or lose touch with the anger that you felt
Yes.
on January 6th. In terms of, well, I guess the insurrection, but also politics in general, how do you manage to keep like a hold on that anger and keep in touch with it without getting just overwhelmed by the sheer rage at everything that's going on all at once?
yeah.
Like, and not just like, yeah, the thing is, like, I feel so much, and then it's like, sometimes it's like hard to not either just get overwhelmed by it or just hide away from it. So
Well, I'll tell you what I told the impeachment managers before we went in. I said that, you know, they had done remarkable preparation. I mean, the team was extraordinary. And I said, and, you know, and they had learned all of the cases of, you know, all of the efforts to claim, for example, the Senate didn't have jurisdiction, and all of the facts that we had access to and so on. But not to lose touch with the anger, because underneath that anger is a profound love of country and patriotism. And, you know, there's this great essay by George Orwell called Notes on Nationalism, where he contrasts patriotism and nationalism. And he says, patriotism is about a profound love of your community and your family and your constitution and your laws and your culture and your way of life. Whereas nationalism, which is what Trump tries to rev up, is all about sinking your individuality into some corporate military behemoth that will go to war against other peoples with hatred and contempt organized for them. So we've got to love our country enough and be patriotic enough to be willing to face down these corrupt nationalists who would destroy everything that America really stands for and that our generation, prior generations have fought for. So I derive the love and enjoyment from my friends, my colleagues, from the people I meet. That keeps me from being overwhelmed by anger, but a little bit of that anger is necessary to keep going. Don't lose touch with what they did to us, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much to Congressman Raskin and Congresswoman Dingell. Let's give them another hand.